All right, so we're going to talk about the types of angle relationships, okay? So the first one is complementary. And complementary angles are two angles whose measures have a sum, which means when we add them together, they have a sum of 90 degrees, right? So if I add down here 60 plus 30, that's going to give us 90 degrees. So sometimes they'll be marked with this little square there to say that it's a right angle. So that's really helpful to know, okay, it's a right angle, it's a complementary angle. Okay, supplementary are two angles whose measures have a sum, which again needs to add them together, a sum of 180 degrees. So they add up to be a straight line, okay? So if we do 130 plus 50, that's going to give us 180 degrees. So these are always a straight line, whereas complementary are always going to be like an L-shaped one. Okay. Two adjacent angles. So adjacent angles are two angles that are side by side. So they're side by side. So what that means is that they have a common vertex and a common ray. So those are some vocabulary words that you may or may not remember. And sometimes they may be congruent, but not always. Which, remember, congruent means equal. Okay, so what I mean by that is a vertex is where two angles meet. So where two angles meet, that's a vertex. So like this is a vertex. And then the ray is what comes out of it. So this is my ray. Okay. So two adjacent angles are ones that are right next to each other. So it could be these two, or these two, or these two, right? Because they all share that vertex, or these two. And if you notice, they're not congruent, right? So sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the last one then. So the last one are vertical. So there are two angles formed by two intersecting lines. So intersecting is when they cross, right? Just like we just saw. They're always congruent, which means that they're always equal to each other. Which, if they're congruent, that means they have the same angle measures. So, looking at these, we want to figure out which two are vertical. So they're congruent and they have the same angle measures. Well, the two that have the same angle measures are this one and this one, right? So they're normally directly across from each other. Okay, so if you have this vertex, they're directly across from each other in the vertex. So there's another set of congruent or vertical lines, right? So these two, because they have the same angle measure, so they're congruent and they're directly across from each other. Okay, so we are going to look and try to find the measure of the missing angle below. So looking at A, we have to figure out what type of angle this is, right? So it's a right angle, which if it's a right angle, it tells me it's complementary and that it adds up to 90 degrees. So we have X plus 37 equals 90, right? Because I know complementary equals 90 degrees. And when we add these two together, they're going to give us 90 degrees. So now we have to figure out what X is, because that's the whole point. We want to figure out what this X is. So we would solve our equation like we normally would. If we have X plus 37, we should subtract 37. And that's going to give us x equals whatever 90 minus 37 is, which is 53 degrees. That means this x is really 53 degrees. Okay, don't forget to put that little degree sign. That's important. Okay, what do we think the next one is? This makes a straight line. Makes a straight line. Well, a straight line is supplementary. And if it's supplementary, it adds up to be 180 degrees. So then I have to add these two up. So I have x plus 118 equals 180 degrees, right? Because we have to add our x plus our 118, and that's going to give us 180. So that's where I got that equation from. Now we're going to solve by subtracting 118 on both sides. And we're going to get x is equal to what? What's 180 minus 118? Well, that's going to give us 62 degrees. So that means this x is 62 degrees. Okay. So looking at this one, you are looking at C, you have these two angles. Okay, they're bound by intersecting lines. So that kind of helps us narrow it down a little bit. It could be adjacent or vertical. But are they directly across from each other, or are they right next to each other? Well, they are right next to each other, right? They're right next to each other. So that means that they are adjacent, which doesn't really help us because they could be congruent or not. But what you may have noticed is that they form a straight line, right? They form a straight line if you look at it like this. So since they form a straight line, they're also supplementary, which means they add up to 180 degrees. So to solve this, we would do z plus 65 equals 180. And again, that's because they're right next to each other, they share a vertex, and they make a straight line. And straight lines add up to 180 degrees. So now we solve this by subtracting 65 on both sides. And we get z equals what? What's 180 minus 65? Well, that's 115 degrees. So this z is 115 degrees. Okay. So I want you to try D, E, and F right now on your own. So try D, E, and F, and I'll unpause and walk you through those. Okay, so I'm going to move a little faster. So you always start by identifying what type of angle. Here's a right angle, so that means it's complementary, which means it adds up to 90 degrees. So your equation should be x plus 25 equals 90. And when you do that, x is equal to 65 degrees. So this is 65 degrees. These make a straight line. So that means it's supplementary, which means it adds up to 180 degrees. So we have 45 plus x equals 180. And you'll get x is equal to 135 degrees. So this angle is 135 degrees. Okay. Last one. So again, here's two intersecting lines. So it could either be adjacent or vertical. In this case, they're directly across from each other. So they're going to be vertical. And if they're vertical, then they're congruent. So that means that they're equal to each other, right? So if this is 76 degrees, then this is 76 degrees. So I don't have to do any math there. All right. If you guys have any questions, just let me know and we could talk about those, okay?